My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning, which should have been my first warning. She never calls on Tuesdays. She usually texts 3 or 4 words, always about money. I was sitting on my back porch in Houston, drinking coffee from the same chipped mug I had used for 20 years, watching the sun come up over the oak trees my wife planted before she passed. I answered on the second ring because that is what fathers do. "Dad," she said, and her voice had that particular brightness to it, the kind that is stretched too thin over something unpleasant underneath. "I just wanted to tell you that the grand opening is this Saturday. The restaurant. We are finally doing it." I set my mug down on the porch railing. I had been waiting 8 months for that sentence. 8 months of checks written, wires transferred, phone calls about permits and kitchen equipment and liquor licenses. I had put $340,000 into that restaurant. I knew the menu better than my daughter did because I had paid for the tasting dinners. "That is wonderful," I said. "Tell me the time, and I will be there early to help set up." The silence that followed was only about 4 seconds long, but it had weight to it. It had the specific gravity of a lie being prepared. "Dad," she said carefully, "it is a very specific crowd we are going for. Very curated. Derek has been working with a PR firm and they have this whole vision for the brand, and the guest list is it is being managed very intentionally." She paused. "We just think it might be better if you came in for dinner the following week, when things are calmer, when it is more your kind of evening." My kind of evening. I looked down at my hands, wrapped around the coffee mug. These hands had spent 31 years in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. These hands had poured foundations in Saudi Arabia and built bridges in Korea and come home to Texas with nothing but a pension, a discipline for saving, and the absolute unshakable belief that hard work was the only honest currency on earth. These hands had written every check that kept her dream alive for 8 months. "I want to make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You are telling me I am not invited to the opening of the restaurant I paid for." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "Dad, you paid for part of it. Derek's investors covered a lot too. And it is not that you are not invited. It is just a specific vibe. Derek's contacts from the investment community are going to be there, and some food critics and influencer people. And we just think, with your background, military, construction, you might not," she searched for the word, "connect with that crowd. You know how you are. You get uncomfortable at fancy things. We are doing this for you too. For me." "Yes," she said, sounding relieved that I had repeated it, as if repetition meant acceptance. "We will have you over the week after. I will make your favorite, the short ribs. It will be better than a crowded opening night anyway. You hate crowds." I had never once told her I hated crowds. I had stood in formation with 500 men in 110-degree heat, and never once complained about the crowd. "All right," I said. "I appreciate you letting me know." She said she loved me and hung up before I could say it back, which was probably intentional. I sat on that porch for a long time after, watching a cardinal land on my wife's oak tree, watching it sit there red and indifferent to everything, and I thought about what my wife would have said. She would have said, "Robert, you have been too easy on that girl since the day she figured out you could not say no to her." She would have been right. I had not always been easy. In the Army, I was known for precision and economy, doing exactly what was needed and nothing more. But the moment my daughter learned to cry, something in my internal architecture shifted. I started paying for things. I paid for her college. I paid for her wedding. I paid for 2 apartments before this one. And when she came to me 2 years ago with a business plan for a restaurant in Midtown Houston and eyes full of the kind of hope I had not seen in her since she was 12 years old, I sat across from her at this very porch table and I wrote a check without asking a single hard question. That was my failure. Not hers alone. Mine. I picked up my phone. I did not call her back. I called my brother Frank, who lives outside of Nashville on 40 acres, where he raises goats and has strong opinions about everything. I told him what had happened in about 90 seconds, because that is how we talk in my family. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Well, Robert, what are you going to do about it?" I looked at the cardinal. It had not moved. "I am going to think," I said. "That is a start," Frank said. I hung up and went inside to find a number I had not dialed in 3 months. My attorney, a woman named Margaret, who had handled my real estate portfolio since I retired from the Army, and started putting my savings into commercial property, the same way other men my age put their savings into boats they never use. Margaret answered on the first ring because Margaret always answers on the first ring. She is the most efficient human being I have ever encountered. "Margaret," I said, "I need you to pull the file on the Westheimer property, the ground floor commercial unit." There was the sound of typing. "The one leased to Cornerstone Hospitality LLC," she said. "Your daughter's restaurant." "Yes," I said. "When does the operating agreement renew?" 60 days, she said. "You want me to flag it?" "I want you to review every clause," I said. "Payment history, compliance, the works." "Robert," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" I thought about Saturday night. I thought about the curated crowd and the influencer people and my daughter's voice stretching over a lie like skin over a wound. "Everything is fine," I said. I did not go to the opening. I spent Saturday evening at a barbecue restaurant on the east side of Houston, where the brisket costs $14 a plate and the paper towels serve as napkins, and nobody cares what you are wearing. I sat at a picnic table across from my friend Curtis, who I served with in the late 80s, and who still has the same laugh he had at 22. I told him about the phone call, and he listened the way old soldiers listen, without interrupting, without flinching. When I finished, he said, "You think they know what they have in that building?" I shook my head. "They think they lease from a property management company called Redstone Commercial Holdings." Curtis raised an eyebrow. "And they never put together that Redstone and Robert have the same first letter?" I smiled for the first time all day. "My son-in-law has never asked a single question about who owns the building," I said. "He signed the lease through his LLC. He dealt with the property manager. He never once looked at the name on the holding company." Curtis laughed. Not his famous laugh. A smaller, sadder one. "That is the thing about people who think they are smart," he said. "They only read what they expect to see." The grand opening photographs hit my daughter's social media that same Saturday night. I did not look for them. My neighbor's daughter, a college student named Priya who mows my lawn and once helped me figure out my phone settings, texted me a link without any context, which told me she had seen something worth sending. I looked. The restaurant was beautiful. I recognized the light fixtures because I had approved the invoice. I recognized the bar because I had wired the deposit for the imported marble. I saw my daughter in a red dress laughing with a group of people I had never met, her hair done in a way I had never seen, looking like someone who had invented herself from scratch and quietly erased the blueprint. I saw my son-in-law giving a speech with a microphone. He was thanking people. He thanked his investors. He thanked the PR firm. He thanked what he called his support system. In the caption, my daughter wrote that the night was proof that when you bet on yourself and surround yourself with the right people, anything is possible. I had written the first check in February. It was for $40,000 to cover the lease deposit and initial build-out. Betting on yourself, apparently, has a very flexible definition. I put the phone down and sat with the silence of my house for a while. My wife's photograph is on the mantel above the fireplace, and I have a habit of talking to it when things get heavy. I told her about the restaurant and the red dress and the caption. I told her that our daughter had not mentioned me once in 300 words of gratitude. "I know," I said to the photograph. "I know. I let it get to this." 17 days after the opening, my daughter called again. This time, it was not Tuesday. This time it was a Thursday, early, before 8 in the morning, which meant it was serious because she does not wake up before 9 unless the building is on fire. "Dad," she said, and the brightness was completely gone from her voice, scraped clean right down to the anxiety underneath. "We have a situation." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I waited. The restaurant is doing well, she said quickly, like she needed me to believe it. Foot traffic is great. Reviews are strong. We have a wait list on weekends. But there is a cash flow gap. It happens with new restaurants. It is very normal. Derek looked it up, and it is extremely common in the first quarter of operation. How much? I said. 18,000, she said. Payroll is due Friday, and the linen vendor has a net 30 clause we did not realize kicked in this month, and there was an equipment repair on the walk-in cooler that came out of nowhere. $18,000. I had spent more than that on the hood ventilation system alone. I made a sound that was neutral. I have heard you need an answer quickly, I said. By tomorrow if possible, she said. I will look at my accounts, I said. I will see what I can do. She thanked me in the way people thank you when they are already spending the money in their head before you have agreed. And she hung up. I finished my coffee. I washed the mug. I dried it by hand and set it back in the cabinet. Then I picked up my phone and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. Margaret, I said. I need you to initiate the standard delinquency review on the Westheimer unit. She paused. They are current on rent. I know, I said. But review the operating clause. Section 12. The prohibition on unauthorized structural modifications. Another pause. Longer. The walk-in cooler repair, she said slowly. They pulled permits without notifying the property manager, I said. The contractor filed the work order and it came across my desk last week. That is a technical breach, Margaret said. Minor, but documentable. Document it, I said. Robert, she said. Are we doing this? I looked out the kitchen window at the oak trees. A cardinal again. Or maybe a different one. I could not tell. Maybe it does not matter which cardinal it is. Maybe what matters is that it keeps showing up. My daughter told me I was not the right kind of person to be seen at the opening of the business I built for her, I said. I would like to find out what kind of person she thinks I am. Margaret was quiet for a beat. I will have a formal notice drafted by end of day, she said. I did not transfer the $18,000. Thursday came and went. Friday morning, my phone began ringing at 7:45. I let it go to voicemail. My daughter left a message that started calm and ended somewhere near panic. She said payroll had not processed. She said there was an issue with the account. She said she was sure it was just a delay, and could I please confirm the wire? I did not call back. At 9:15, my son-in-law called. He never calls me. In 2 years of marriage and 8 months of my financing his vision, he had called me exactly twice, both times about wire instructions. He called me now because the money was gone and I was the faucet. I let it ring. At 11, I drove to Curtis's house, and we sat on his porch and played chess and did not talk about my daughter. That is one of the valuable things about old friends. They know when a man needs to sit next to another human being without having to explain anything. That afternoon, a formal notice from Redstone Commercial Holdings was delivered to the restaurant. Margaret had flagged the unauthorized repair work and issued a compliance letter requiring a response within 5 business days. It was not an eviction. It was a signal. It was me saying, without using my name, that the ground beneath them was not as solid as they believed. My daughter called 6 times between noon and dinner time. On the 7th call, I answered. Dad. Her voice was fraying at the edges. What is happening? The payroll did not go through. We had to call every employee and explain. It was humiliating. And now we got this letter from the property management company about some permit thing that Derek had no idea about, and I don't understand why you haven't called back. Are you okay? Is something wrong with you medically? I am perfectly healthy, I said. I have been thinking. Thinking about what? Her voice climbed. About investments, I said. About how much I have put into the restaurant and what the return looks like. Dad, it has been 3 weeks since we opened. I know exactly how long it has been, I said. I also know that I was not at the opening. I also know that your caption on Saturday thanked 17 people and a concept and a PR firm and your own personal resilience, and not one word mentioned who signed the first check. The silence that followed was different from the one on the Tuesday morning phone call. That silence had been careful, constructed. This one was genuinely stunned. "I didn't think," she started. "No," I said. "You did not. Dad, it was an oversight. I was caught up in the moment. I will post something. I will tag you. Whatever you want." "I do not want a tag," I said. "I want you to understand something. When your mother and I were your age, we did not have anyone writing checks. We had a used car that overheated on the highway and a one-bedroom apartment with a window unit that only worked when it felt like it. I spent 3 years in the Corps eating government food and sending money home before we had enough for a down payment on this house. I am not telling you this to hurt you. I am telling you because I think somewhere in the last decade I made it too easy for you to forget it." She was crying now. I could hear it, even though she was trying not to let me. "I love you," I said, "but the wire is not coming this week. You need to figure out the payroll situation with your investors, the ones who were in the photographs, and you need to respond to that letter from your property management company." "What?" she said, through the tears. "Why are you bringing up the property company?" "Because the building matters," I said. "And you should know everything about the building you are in." I hung up gently, not with anger, with the particular steadiness of a man who has finally stopped confusing softness for love. The next 3 weeks were instructive. My daughter and her husband did what people who have never had to solve a real problem do when the safety net disappears. They looked for another net. They called her parents-in-law, who contributed $8,000 and a considerable amount of resentment. They negotiated a 2-week extension with the payroll processor by mortgaging the next month's revenue projections. They called 3 of the investors from the opening night, the ones who had been photographed laughing with my son-in-law over things he had not built yet, and 2 of those 3 suddenly had liquidity issues, and one stopped returning calls entirely. My son-in-law posted on LinkedIn about the realities of running a small business and the importance of community and the lessons learned in the trenches of entrepreneurship. The post got 41 likes. I was not one of them. My daughter texted me on a Wednesday. "Just checking in." 3 words. No ask attached. It was the closest thing to an olive branch she had the vocabulary for at that moment. I texted back. "Good. How is the restaurant?" "Surviving," she wrote. It was the most honest word she had used with me in months. What I had not told my daughter was that the compliance letter was only the beginning of what I knew. Margaret had done a full audit of the operating agreement and found that my son-in-law had quietly brought in a 3rd business partner without amending the LLC documents, which violated the terms of the original lease arrangement. It was not malicious, it was sloppy. The carelessness of people who assume the adults in the room will keep cleaning up after them. But it was a material breach. And in commercial property law, material breaches have consequences. Margaret called me on a Friday afternoon to walk me through the options. I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad the way I used to sit with maps during field exercises, looking at terrain, planning a route. "We could terminate the lease and offer a 30-day relocation window," Margaret said. "Or we can negotiate a restructured agreement where the holding company takes a minority stake in the restaurant operation in exchange for lease forgiveness." "The second option?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "That is more generous than I expected. I am not trying to put them on the street," I said. "I am trying to put them in reality." "There is a difference," Margaret agreed. "I want to present it in person," I said. "Not through a letter. I want to sit down with both of them and explain exactly who has been on the other side of every document they have ever signed in that building." She said she would set it up as a formal meeting with the property management office, framed as a routine lease review. My daughter and her husband would not know who was walking in until I was already there. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday at 10 in the morning, which felt right somehow. I wore my army dress uniform, not because I needed the authority. I earned that authority over 31 years, and it lives in my spine, whether I am wearing a uniform or a flannel shirt. I wore it because I wanted my daughter to see all of me at once. Every version of the man she had decided did not fit the vibe of her curated evening, and I wanted her to have to hold that image while we talked about the future of the building she was standing in. When I walked into the conference room of the property management office, my daughter was sitting on the left side of the table in a blazer, professional and composed, with a legal pad of her own. My son-in-law was on her right, in a sport coat, holding a coffee he had not touched. The property manager, a composed woman named Linda who reported to Margaret, was at the head of the table. My daughter's face when she saw me went through 4 distinct expressions in about 2 seconds. Confusion first, then something that wanted to be relief, then confusion again as she read the uniform, then a stillness that I recognized from when she was a child and had just understood that she was actually in trouble. "Dad," she said, "what are you doing here?" I sat down across from them. I placed my hands flat on the table. I looked at my son-in-law, who was staring at the brass on my chest with the expression of a man doing rapid and uncomfortable arithmetic. "I'm the landlord," I said. The silence was thorough. "I want to be accurate about that," I continued, "because I have spent 40 years valuing accuracy. I do not own this property directly. I own it through Redstone Commercial Holdings, which is the company that your attorney had you sign a lease with 18 months ago when you were still planning the concept and I was still writing checks to keep you planning." My son-in-law opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The name," he said. "Redstone. I chose it before you came into the family," I said. "After a ridge in Afghanistan, where my unit held a position for 11 days on nothing but MREs and stubbornness, I thought it was a good name for something meant to last." My daughter looked at her husband and then back at me, and I watched her recalculating. I watched her counting backwards through every interaction she had ever had with the property management office. Every lease renewal, every maintenance call, every formal letter, including the compliance notice from 3 weeks ago, and understanding that on the other side of every one of those communications was her father eating breakfast from a chipped mug on a back porch, waiting to see what she would do. "Why?" she said. Her voice was very small. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you never asked," I said, and I kept my voice even, not unkind. "In 18 months of me funding this restaurant, you never once asked where my money came from. You never asked what I did after the army. You never asked about my business or my properties or anything about my life that did not directly involve a transfer number. I was a resource. I was glad to be a resource. But a resource is not a father, and I have been trying to figure out for a while now whether you knew the difference." She was pressing her lips together the way she does when she does not want to cry in front of people. I reached into the folder I had carried in and slid 2 documents across the table. "The first is a formal notice of lease restructuring," I said. "Redstone is offering to forgive the existing debt, which includes the payroll advance I decided not to send, and 3 months of deferred service charges you may not have known were accumulating, in exchange for a 15% operational stake in the restaurant LLC. This stake carries no voting rights and no day-to-day involvement. I will not be choosing your menu or attending your events uninvited. I will simply be a partner on paper." My son-in-law picked up the document. He read it the way a man reads something when he is hoping to find a loophole, and gradually understanding there is not one. "The second document," I said, "is something I want you both to read before you sign anything." They looked at the second page. It was a single-spaced letter, 2 pages, that I had written by hand the night before and asked Margaret to type. It was an accounting of everything I had contributed to their life since the wedding, not in a spirit of debt collection, in a spirit of honest record-keeping. Because I have learned in 31 years of military service that you cannot navigate from a position you refuse to accurately identify. They needed to know where they were standing. The total at the bottom of the second page was $412,000 over 2 years. My son-in-law set the papers down. He looked at the table. I watched something move through him that I did not have a name for. It was not shame exactly. It was more like the specific vertigo of a man who has been walking on what he thought was solid ground and has just looked down. "I owe you an apology," he said, and his voice had the quality of something unrehearsed. "The opening night. You should have been there. I let that happen, and I should not have. It was the first honest sentence he had said to me in 2 years, and it landed differently than I expected. Not with satisfaction. With something quieter and more complicated. With the feeling of a door that has been stuck for a long time finally shifting in its frame. My daughter looked at me across the table. Her blazer suddenly looked like a costume. She looked like my daughter, the one who used to sit at the kitchen table while her mother made soup and draw pictures of horses she wanted to have someday. I was embarrassed, she said. Of myself, not of you. I was scared that the people we were trying to impress would see how much help we needed and decide we were not worth investing in. I thought if they saw you, they would ask questions I did not want to answer. She paused. That is not an excuse. I know that. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said. It is not an excuse, but it is the truth, and I would rather have the truth than a comfortable explanation. I stood up. I gathered my folder. I left both documents on the table. You have 10 days to review the restructuring offer with your own attorney, I said. Whatever you decide, I want you to make the decision based on what is actually true, not on what is convenient. I will tell you this. If you sign it, I am a partner who will never make your life difficult, because I have no interest in the restaurant business and every interest in watching you build something real. And if you do not sign it, I will find another tenant for the space, and I will wish you genuinely well in wherever you land next. I walked toward the door. My daughter's voice stopped me before I reached it. Dad, she said. The second document. Did you always know what the total was? I turned back. I looked at her. I knew to the dollar, I said. I always knew. I just thought for a long time that love meant you were not supposed to say it out loud. I left the building and walked to my truck in the parking structure and sat for a few minutes with the engine off. I called Frank. He answered immediately. Well, he said. Did you do it? I did it, I said. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. Like a man who just did a hard thing correctly, I said. Which is the only way hard things should ever be done. Frank laughed. The famous one this time. You want to come up here for the weekend? I just got a new batch of goats, and they are absolutely terrible, and I think you would enjoy them. I laughed too. Friday, I said. Save me some coffee. My daughter called 2 days later. Not about money. She called to tell me that she and her husband had reviewed the restructuring offer and decided to accept it. She also called to tell me that she had taken down the opening night caption and rewritten it. She told me the new version was shorter, more accurate, and included a sentence about the people who believed in the restaurant before it had a name or an address or a single paying customer. She did not ask if I had seen it. She just told me she had done it. I told her I was proud of her. Not proud in the soft, automatic way. I had been proud for years. The kind of proud that costs nothing and means nothing. Proud in the specific way. The way that requires you to have seen someone struggle and choose correctly. That kind of proud is the only kind that matters. She started to cry, quietly, the way she used to when she was small and relieved about something. I am coming to dinner next week, I told her. Short ribs, if you can manage it. If not, whatever you have. She laughed through the crying. We have a full menu, Dad, she said. You have seen the invoices. I said I had. The goats in Tennessee were in fact terrible, and I enjoyed them tremendously. I spent 3 days with Frank, sleeping on a cot in his barn because his guest room has a leak he refuses to fix. Eating eggs, he collects himself, and drinking coffee strong enough to require a warning label. We talked about everything and nothing. We talked about our mother, who has been gone 12 years. We talked about the army, and about getting old, and about what it means to have spent your life building things. On the last evening, sitting on his porch watching the fields go dark, Frank asked me whether I thought my daughter would be all right. I thought about the restaurant. I thought about the 2 documents on the conference table. I thought about the phone call, and the rewritten caption, and the specific timbre of honest crying versus strategic crying. I had heard both enough to know the difference. I think she might be, I said. Frank nodded. You did right, he said. You let her stand up. On her own. I let her stand up on her own, I repeated. Which is not the same as letting her fall. He agreed that it was not. I drove back to Houston on a Sunday afternoon with the windows down, listening to the kind of nothing that Texas sounds like between towns, and I thought about what my wife would say about how all of this had ended. I think she would say that I had finally stopped buying my daughter's love with a checkbook and started offering her something harder to come by and worth considerably more. I think she would say it was about time. And I think she would be right, the way she was right about almost everything. The restaurant is still open. I have eaten there 4 times. The food is genuinely excellent. The staff knows my face now. The hostess seats me without a reservation. Not because I own the building, but because my daughter told her to. That is the only perk I have ever asked for. Did I ever tell you what happens when the well runs dry? People either learn to dig their own, or they spend the rest of their lives being thirsty and wondering why. I spent more than 30 years building things with my hands before I understood that the most important thing a father can build for his children is not a safety net. It is a standard. Give them the net, and they will fall into it. Give them the standard, and one day, if you have done your job at all honestly, they will rise to it. That is the only foundation worth laying. Everything else is just concrete. If this story landed somewhere true for you, leave a like and let me know in the comments whether you have ever had to step back to let someone you love step up. I read every one, and subscribe if you believe that real love sometimes looks like holding the line. We will be back with another story soon.